Welcome guys to a new video in which we'll build a clean architecture first offline news app. So in this app, we'll get the news data from an API and then we will cache that data locally with our own database and then show the data from the database to the user. And the advantage of this is that if the user opens the app without internet connection, they will still be able to see the news because we have that news cached in the database locally. And that's what's called first offline functionality. You will also learn pagination. We will do dependency injection with Queen. We will use Ktor to get the data from the API. We'll use clean architecture as I said, MVI for the presentation layer, and Compose UI of course. Now let's see the app. Let's open it. Now it's going to load the data because we do have internet connection. So here we have a news item with the author of this news, a title, and a description and the date this news was released on. Here we have a top bar with this title, which is the news, and then we can scroll. If we don't have an image, for example, we show this, and here we get images and a bunch of news. Here in the top bar, as you can see, it's hidden. If we just scroll up just a little bit, we show it. So we have a top bar behavior with the scaffold in which we have all the news. And then we can scroll down like this. Once we get to the bottom of the list, as you can see, we will be able to paginate. And here, even though you see the same news 2 times or even 3 times, it's not the same because the author is different. It's just the same news. If we open this news, you can see that we still have the author, the date, the title, and the description, and then the content of the news. Now we can go back to open a new one like this, for example. We still see the same data, which are all the author, the news, the title, the image, the content, and description. So all of that is just working great. Now, the advantage we have is if we close the app, we turn on airplane mode, we open the app, we can still see the news, as you can see, even though some images are not loaded, but some of them are definitely loaded like this. And if we get to the bottom now, we won't be able to paginate since we don't have internet connection. But if we open any news like this, we can still see the data and read all the news stuff. And now if we bring back internet connection and we scroll down, we will be able to paginate now. As you can see, now we are paginating, getting brand new news just like that. The app is really solid. It's a clean architecture app, first offline, and all the stuff that you want to learn to build scalable and testable apps. This is the API that we'll be using, which is called newsdata.io. I will leave its link in the description. What you want to do is create an account, simply go to your dashboard, click on API keys, you will get an API key right there, which is what you need. And now we can go to the documentation to see that we have a free plan, which is what we are going to use in our app. If you want to pay, you can do that, but in our case, we're not really going to. And here with the free plan, we get the latest news, which is exactly what we need. If you want to pay to get more news like crypto news and all that stuff, you can do that. And here's the URL of the API just like this, and then followed by the API key with some other parameters. What we get from the API is all of this stuff like the title, the article ID, the source ID, the image, and here is how it would look like. So we can now get started in building the app after we saw the API that we are going to use. We can go to our libs.versions.taml. We can update this one. And here are all the versions that we need, which are Quell to load images, Ktor to get the news data from the API, Queen for dependency injection, Jetpack, Compose, and kotlin externalization for the new type safe navigation in Compose, material, icons extended to get more icons, room, and KSP is needed for room. We also want to use a different Kotlin version, which needs to match this KSP version. So we need to take this 22 and have it right here as well. And now let me just paste all these all these libraries, which are these again: room, KSP, Quell, Ktor, Queen, and navigation and icons. We will need 2 plugins, which are these for Kotlin serialization and KSP, and 2 bundles right here. One for Queen dependency injection and one for Ktor, since we have a lot of dependencies in there, so we just put them in one place. And now that I think about it, I also want to make another bundle for room, since we have a lot of dependencies in there as well, or a lot of libraries, which are all of these in the top here. So we want to take this and then simply paste it like this, put a comma, duplicate this a few more times, go for the next one, which is this one, paste it as well, and then room runtime, paste that, and KSP And there is actually one thing I just realized is that we don't use Rome compiler with implementation. We actually use it with annotation process, which means we can't have it in here. And then this KSP Gradle plugin, which is technically can be used with Rome like this, but it's not only for Rome. It's just KSP. We can use it with any other thing. So for that, I'd rather also remove it and only keep these two. So I think that's that. I can now sync the project to go to build.gradle, the top level one, and add these two plugins, Kotlin, serialization, and KSP. Sync the project again. Go to now build.gradle, the app module one. To add the same two plugins, we maybe want to use Java 17. Here as well, let's update our Java version, then update the Kotlin compiler extension version like this. Now we want to paste all these dependencies here. Now we want to create the room one since we changed it a little bit. So room is going to be implementation libs bundles.room. And since I said not all of them are in there, sync the projects again just before we add KSP here because we need it. Project is synced. Let's paste these, which are now the KSP Gradle plugin. As I said, it's not exactly part of room, and we can probably bring it to the bottom here. We have annotation process, Rome compiler, that's why I didn't have it inside the bundle, and also Rome compiler in KSP, and now the KSP Gradle plugin. I think that's that. We can sync the project and we are good to start building the app. First of all, let's create the structure of the app. So to see what we are going to need. And one thing as well is that I don't want to keep changing the font because we'll use a different font for our app. We can come here and then say font family is going to be font family dot serif. Maybe that's how it's pronounced. So we want this font family. Let me just uncomment these and do it like this and use the same font there if we have to. So just like this. We want to use this font because it looks more like a news font, I guess. However, let's create now the structure. Let's create the core package. Core. Inside core, actually, we also need another package which says presentation. We want to put these two inside there, like that. And then inside core, we need more packages. First of all, for the data layer. And inside data layer, we have local. And we also have another one for remote. Because we have online functionality to get the data from the API and offline functionality to cache that data in Room database. We will also have a domain layer, so another package called domain, and then one last package inside, actually not inside data, but inside core, we will have domain. Inside core now, one last package we need is the I for dependency injection, like that. Now we can create another one. Let's just copy core, paste it, and let's call it news, in which we'll have the news list. Inside news, we won't need all those packages. We won't need data because the data of the news is shared between two features, which are the news list and the news details. So it will be in core since it's shared between them. So we can delete this data. Or definitely if we want to keep it inside data and remove it from core, but then have the two screens inside news here. So for example, in presentation, we call one of them news list screen and news details screen. So as you want. Now I don't want these two inside news here. For me, I'm just going to delete data and domain from him. I'm going to keep the I and presentation. However, let's now copy news again and paste it. Let's call it now article, which is the article. If we click on an article in the news to see the details. So article like this, and we'll still have the I and presentation packages inside it. So that's the structure of the app. Now what we want to do is let's start building it, starting from the domain layer. That's where I always love to start my apps from. But just for this one now, we actually need the item that we get from the API. And for that, we want to go here to actually see that the type of thing that we get is this one. So technically we can just copy all of this like this, and then we want to use this plugin to create an item from it. So we want to go to data or just remote here, create a new Kotlin data class from JSON. You want to paste this JSON inside, so copy the whole thing maybe, or just a few items from the list because it's a large list. You want to copy that and paste it in here. Call it, for example, use DTO to create that item, and I'm going to show you now how it's going to look like. So let me just paste them. Here they are, the two. So we have a use DTO and then use list DTO. So a use list DTO has the list of items. So let's just see that here. Here we have the next page, which is this one, and then the results. And if we go to the top of this one like this, the results, as you can see, is a list of what? Of news DTO, which is called results because we need to keep the same name. I didn't put success and total results because I don't really need those. And now let's check the news DTO. in which we have now a lot of things. Technically, we have the article ID, title, link, keywords, a lot of stuff. But I don't need all of that. I need the article ID, the title, description, content, publish date, and source name or the author of the news, and the image URL. These are the only things I need. And I made them nullable because how if something didn't exist in the API? So you need to make sure that that's nullable. And then here as well, these two are nullable. Now we can go and create our domain layer. And for that, we can just copy the same news DTO and news list and paste them in domain. So they are going to look something like this. So as I said, actually one thing, we made them serializable because we'll use them with Ktor, and they need to be serializable because Ktor will serialize them from a JSON object to this data class. So we need to make them like this. And in domain, I pasted news list, which is exactly the same list as we had there. Let me just get rid of this, which is the same as the news DTO. And simply we have a list of news, which is this one. As you can see, the same stuff in there. Of course, eventually we will map this news DTO to this news. And the reason why we do that is that we don't want to use this domain objects in here or model inside the data as the way we get the data from the API, because how if we want to use a different API, then this one won't work anymore, and we already use this one in our presentation layer heavily, which means our presentation layer will be affected by something that we changed in our data layer, which is entry pattern. We actually want to make a DTO in here, or a data transfer object, which would change if we change the API, and then we just change the way we map it to this one. So this one will remain the same because we use it in our presentation layer, and we don't want to change our presentation layer because we changed our data layer. That's the separation of concerns we've been talking about. And if you want to learn more about this and the advantages of these stuff, then check my premium course in the description, in which you will build an industry level solid app using clean architecture and all these industry skills, and also building a Ktor backend from the ground up. You can find this link in the description if you are interested. So what we want to do now is let's get started with our domain layer and build the stuff that we need, which are the news repository interface. So create a new Kotlin file class that is an interface and call it news repository. Here we will have a bunch of functions. We will have a suspend fun get news that just returns a flow of actually something we will need to create in here, which is called news result. There's going to be an interface or maybe a sealed class. So sealed class. Inside this sealed class, we'll have a generic data like this that is of type T, and that is nullable equals to null. And we also need to have that in our class. I will explain this. In here, we will have a class that is success that takes also T, and that is the data of type T, and this extends our news result, passing the data. And then we'll have a class that is error that also has the type T and extends news result like this. So what this means is that when we make our API call, or we just try to get the data from our repository, it's possible that we can get the data or we might not get it if there is no internet connection and we don't have anything cached in the database, or if just something is wrong there. So we need to return this, which is a news result that has success and error classes. When we actually successfully get the data, then we return a success with the data, which is a T-generic type, which means the data can be anything. And then if there is no data, then we have an error, so we return an error. If we also want to pass a message with this, we can create a var error of type string that is nullable. And then here, since we have the data, the error is going to be null. And in here, it won't be null, so we'll have now this error of type string, and we pass that. Now the data is going to be null, but the error won't be. So if we want to pass some error string with the error right here, we can do that. Or if we just want to pass an integer, which is the type of the error. So if we want to have for each error some corresponding integer or unum class or whatever, and then in the presentation layer, we show a string error depending on the type of that error. So that's how it would be. In this case, we can definitely just pass a string or as you want it to be. So here it's going to be of type news result, that is a news list. We have an error in here. Maybe this is the wrong flow. Yes, that was the wrong flow. Let me just re-import it from Kotlin Xcoroutines. So we want to return a flow, which means we want to make multiple emissions if we need to. And then the news result, which is this one that we just created. And that is the data type, which is this T, is now our news list that has a list of the news and the next page that we can paginate to. And then we want to paginate, so suspend fun paginate, that takes a next page string. Since the next page is a string, not an integer in this API, we then want to also get a flow, actually the same as we have it right here. The last thing we want is to get an article. So article like this. And now we don't have a next page but an article ID. So we want to pass an article ID like this to get the article, which is actually going to be now a flow of type just news, which is the article specifically. You can name this article if you want to, that's all up to you. And actually let me do that. So right here, instead of naming it news, let me name it article. I think that's a better name. Rename it everywhere just like that. I don't know about the domain. If we want to name this one also article DTO, I think that would be great as well. So article DTO. And here we need to keep the same name, which is results, as we have in the API. And let's get started with the local stuff. Let's create an entity. Actually, the entity is going to be the same as the article that we have. We can just copy paste it here. Let's call it article entity. We want to annotate it with entity that we get from room. And then we want to make the article ID as the primary key. Room can already generate primary keys, but for us, we want to use this one. So annotate this with primary key and then auto generated set to false, because we don't want it to be auto generated. We want to use what we get from the API, and it's going to be like this. So the article ID is a really large unique string. The other stuff will be the same. We can now create our DAO inside here. Let's call it, for example, news DAO, or maybe articles DAO. That's probably better. So here articles DAO, and then we want to annotate this with DAO. We'll have a bunch of functions in here. Let me just paste them to save some time. This has to be an interface, and the reason why I'm pasting them is because I have a lot of room database videos. If you want to understand room in details, I have a video in description that will teach you everything about it. So I'm trying to get the article list I have in my database. And so the query is going to be select from my article entity, which means the table in which I have all the articles, select all of them, and then upsert article list. So I want to pass the article list that I want to add to my database, and that is upsert. So if there is an item already in the list and already in the database, we'll just update that. If not, we will insert it. That's why it's called upsert. And then query to get an article. So we want to pass an article ID, and then we want to go to our article table to get the exact article where the article ID is equal to this one that we passed to this function. And then we want to clear our database to delete everything from it. So delete from article entity. So everything should be deleted. And that's that. Now we want to create our database that is going to be article DB or article database. This now has to be an abstract class, and we want to annotate this with add database. The entities are going to be my article entity double common class, and then the version is going to be 1. We want to have our DAO in here that is going to be abstract var DAO that is of type article DAO. That's the database. We want to do some dependency injection right now. So here we will have a module called core module. If you don't understand dependency injection with Queen, I will leave a video in description that will teach you all of that as well. And here we want to have a val core module. That is a module actually equal to module. We want to provide our database, so single room.database builder passing underweight application, and then the database itself that is going to be article database double common class .java. Import that. The database name could be article db dot maybe db or something, whatever. And then we want to build that. So here dot build. We have an error in here. So article database. Maybe this needs to extend room database like that. Yes. We want to provide the DAO, which is what we need in our app. So a single again that is going to be get my article database dot DAO. So this is how we provide the DAO. And then we want to provide our HTTP client, our Ktor HTTP client that we can use to get the data from the API. Well, it's quite a lot of code, so I'm going to again paste it and then explain it. I think that's going to save time. There is no point of writing all of this. So let's actually see what we have. We have a single in which we have an HTTP client. We have CIO for the engine that actually runs this client. So what runs Ktor behind the scenes is going to be the CIO engine. If you want me to make a video specifically for Ktor like this, please tell me in the description, because that's probably the only video I don't have in my channel. Anyway, expected success. Of course, we expect a success. Engine endpoint, we want to keep the endpoint that we are trying to call for 5 seconds and connect timeout. If we don't connect in 5 seconds, then that's it. We want to make 3 attempts to connect to the endpoint, which is the endpoint in which we get all the news. And then here install a plugin that is content negotiation just for JSON. We want to tell our client that we want to convert some JSON to our data class that we will have in our app. Pretty print to actually be able to print the stuff that we get in a well formatted readable way. To make this more lenient to accept things like trillion commas and stuff, ignore unknown keys. So if we don't have some field in our data class but we have it in the JSON, we will just ignore that. And then a header to tell that with every request we make that what we expect to get or what we want to get is a JSON, so that the server knows what we are trying to get with every request call that we make. And then install another plugin that is login. So this is also a plugin, another plugin called login to just log what we get. So with every log that we get, we print that message with log, and then we want to print everything. So here maybe I'm missing a little bracket, and that's it for this dependency injection. Now we can now go to create our repository inside data. So here let's call it the news repository, and that is the implementation. Now here we want to implement obviously our news repository, and we want to get or want to implement the functions. We do want to have a private vol HTTP client of type HTTP client, and then private vol DAO of type article DAO. And before getting started with this one, let's go to our root package, create a class called app that should extend application. Actually application, maybe that's the wrong one, this one. And here we should have the onCreate function. We want now to actually start queen. We want underway context to be this at app, and then we want modules, and actually we'll have a bunch of modules. The core module, that's what we have for now, and later we'll add the other modules. So this is how we start queen. We want to go to our manifest to register that app class with this name attributes, and that's it. Now we can start with this one. Let's first create a little tag that tells us what we are doing. Private vol tag, that is going to be the same name as my repository, for example, like this, with double comma and space. We want to have a base URL for our HTTP client, private vol base URL, and that is going to be this one that we have in our API. I don't want to show it here because it's unfortunately showing my API key unless I do this. This is going to be the base URL, and of course you want to keep your API key hidden, and that's exactly what we need here. API key, paste your API key right here. Don't push your API key to Git. That's not safe. Now to get the news, since this is an offline first app, we first want to get the news from the API, cache that in our database, and then return it from the database. This is if we have internet connection. If we don't have internet connection, then we will try to get it from the API. We'll realize that we can't since there is no internet connection. We then get what we have in the database. That's how it goes. That's the first offline functionality. But still, if we have internet connection, we'll always have fresh data, and if we don't, we'll still see news. So let me create two helper functions for that. The first one is going to be private vol get local news, since we will use it a lot. We want to pass a next page, even though we don't have a next page, but we want to just pass it in the CY. That is going to be a string private fun, not private var. This returns a news list, and what we want to return is now var local news. That is going to be DAO.get article list. So this is all the articles, and this is a suspending function. We do want to print what we get, so print line tag plus, so the name of the function get local news, and then plus local news dot size. We also want to print the next page plus next page, and that is just like this. So next page can also do this. And this is just a print line to see what we actually get in logcat. So now we want to get the news list inside this article. So now what we have is a list of articles, but we want a news list. We want to create a vol news list, a new news list, and articles are going to be my local news. We want to map that it.map it, because here what we get is a list of type article entity, but we need here a list of type article, which means we need to create a mapper that maps those two. And here is the mappers. So I'm just spacing them to save time again, because that's too much code to write. So what we want to do is to see what we need to map to which. When we get the data from the API, it's going to be news list TTO. We then want to map that to news list that we can use in our app. But since we also have first offline functionality, then we also want to map that to article entity to be able to cache it in the database. And then when we get to the database, we want to map that article entity to article that we can use in our presentation. Here we have news list TTO to news list that we can use in our app with the next page and all the results are now the articles. So now also our result is a list of article.to. So we want to convert an article.to to an article, actually this one to article. So like this, we assign the article ID. If that's nullable, then that's an empty string, the title, description, published ID, source name, image URL, and the content. Unfortunately, with the free plan that we have in our API, we don't get content, and the content is always going to be not available in free plan. So to just make the app more beautiful, I just have this long, very long string in there with the article ID that makes each content unique from another content. And then we want to convert an article entity to article. Since I renamed this is going to be article as well. So this is when we get it from the database, we want to convert to article. And then if we want to save it in the database, then it's going to be of type article to article entity. And simply we map each one of these to each one of these. I actually have a video just for map and why we need to convert these objects. I will also leave a video for that in the description so you could understand why exactly this is necessary. And right here, we want to map this to article, and then the next page is going to be next page. Of course, next page is nullable if we don't have it for some reason. Now we want to return this news list. That's how we get the local news. Now to get remote news, we can just copy this, paste it like this, and name it get remote news. For that, we need to get vol news list DTO, and that is of type news list DTO. There's going to be my HTTP client.get, passing the base URL of the API, and then we want to pass other things, which are some parameters in here. The first parameter is going to be my API key. This is how it's going to be if we check here. So make sure that it's written the same way. API key is going to be my API key. This is the URL that we need. So the base URL followed by the API key, and then the language of the news, which is going to be English, and then the page that we want to get. Of course, at first we don't have a page when we are just trying to make the first initial call, then we don't have a page, so it will be like this without a page, but then later we will have pages. And then when we want to get a single article or just the details of that article, again it's going to be the API key followed by the ID of that article, just like this. So right here we need another parameter for the language. So parameter that is going to be now language, and it is by default English. And then we want to check the next page. If we are making the very first API call, we don't have a next page. If we are not, then we do have a next page. So it's going to be if next page is not null, then actually here is not equal to null, then we do have it. So parameter that is page, simply next page, and then dot body, because we want to body of this that will be converted eventually to this news list DTO that is serializable, and then these will be converted to this article ID that is also serializable. We want to actually print again what we get, since I think that's important. So we want to print right here. We have a remote list dot result dot size, and then the next page will also print that. Now it's actually get remote news. We want to return that eventually. Return news list to news list. That's it now for the two helper functions. In the load news function, we want to return a flow, import that, and then what we want to get first is the remote news, like this remote news list. That is going to be try catch, because we might have exceptions. So try catch exception, and then what we want to get here is get remote news. And since this is the very first time we want to get the news, then we don't have a page in here. When we paginate, we do have a page. If there is something wrong here, we want to print the stack trace, and then we want to use our tag to actually again print it. So print line tag plus, for example, load news or get news. That's what we named it, get news remote exception, and then print the message as well, and then that is going to be null. So this remote news list, if we have an exception, that is going to be null, otherwise it's going to be what returned from this function. So we want to continue here, that we want to check if it's null or not. So remote news list dot let, here we get of course a non-nullable remote news list. And what we want to do, we want to clear our database since we get brand new news. And of course, this is for the very first time. So we want to clear our database, and then we want to upsert all of these news. So dow.upsert article list, that is going to be my remote news list dot articles dot map it to article entity, because in the DAO or in the DAO we need entities. And then we want to emit a success, since I did get some news from the API. So news result, remember this can be either a success with a data or an error with a message. So news result dot success, and then the data is going to be get local news, since now I said this is a first offline app, so we want to get the data from the offline source that is our database. So get local news. The next page is going to be my remote news list.next page. We just passed that next page so that we can add it to this news list that we created right here to be returned, and then that will be emitted with the flow, and then we want to return from our flow, and that's it. If we have internet connection, we get the data from the API and then we save it in the database. We first clear the database because we don't want to get too many items in the database. So we clear the database, we save that in the database, and then we get it from the database. However, if this doesn't execute, then we do not have internet connection. So now we want to get the local news directly. So it's going to be val local news list. That is going to be get local news. The next page is null since I don't have a next page. And then if local news list dot articles dot is not empty, then I do have things to return. So I'm going to emit a news result, and that is going to be dot success local news list, and then return from my flow. If this also doesn't execute, so the list is empty, then I can then emit a news result dot error, and then the message could be no data, or as I said, an error number, or whatever we want to do with that. So I'm going to do, for example, no data. That's how we get the news. So as I said, we first of all get them from the remote source, and then we return them by first clearing our database, saving them in the database, and then get them from the database. If we don't get them from the remote source, or this doesn't execute because we don't have internet connection, then we want to get them from the local source, check if the list is not empty to emit that with a success. If it is empty, then we don't have any data, we emit an error. We want to copy this for the other one, that is pagination. So we want to paste this. Now we don't really have any when we actually paginate, we don't have anything locally. All that we have is in the remote source, but we will still save that data locally. So now it's going to be actually a little bit different. Get remote news with the next page and paginate remote exception. And then when the remote news list is not empty, we don't want to clear the database because now we're just paginating. We want to add these items to what we already have in there. We want to absorb them. So remote news list dot articles, map it to article entity, and then we want to emit that. The only problem in here is that if we emit it directly from the database, we'll be emitting what we already have in the database, which is what we already have also in the presentation layer, and then also these new items that we get here from the pagination, which means we'll have duplicated items. And the solution for that, and only in this case, we want to emit what we get directly from the remote. So it's going to be news result.success. It's not going to be get them from the database, even though that would work, but we'll have duplicated items. So for that, it's just going to be remote news list. That's already converted to what we need from this helper function. So as I said, to remember why we did this. So it's not going to be not getting them from the database like get news, because we will also get old items that we already have before paginating. So that's why I just keep this comment in here so that you understand why we did this. Forgetting an article, that's in its own feature. We don't need to do that right now. All I'm going to do is, now that I built the data layer, we don't need this. I'm going to run this. So now that I just pasted my API key here, I don't want to write this code right now. I'm just going to comment it, go to my interface, and then comment it there as well. Now we just built our data layer of this app and also the domain layer. And as you saw, there are a lot of stuff going on in there and a lot of stuff to keep in mind and to consider while we are working with a first offline app. And if you want to learn more about this with a solid industry level app, then check my premium course in which we build a solid app using all these stuff that you saw in this video, and also building a Ktor backend. In the next video, we'll continue building the app, testing if everything was working fine, and support me by subscribing and leaving a like in this video. See you in the next video. Bye.